An empire where the sun never sets. That is how the modern world called the largest nation in the history of mankind, the British Empire. How did a small island country manage to occupy such a vast territory until the middle of the 19th century and become the most powerful nation in the world? This video will tell you about the history of the most powerful of all colonial empires. The foundation of the power of the British Empire was laid by its co-founder, England. The Kingdom of England was an island country that often fought, and therefore paid considerable attention to the development of a professional army and navy, which then dominated the oceans and greatly facilitated colonization. The first conquered and colonized land since the 16th century was Ireland. The processes of colonization were accelerated by a large number of poor inhabitants and the early development of capitalist relations. This contributed to the accumulation of financial assets in the hands of future colonizers. In 1707, Scotland and England were united as the Kingdom of Great Britain. This alliance allowed for additional financial and human resources for British expansion throughout the world. As early as the late 15th century, the first English ships, led by Giovanni Caboto, explored the coast of North America. The first English colony was established in Newfoundland Island, 1583. The initiative of colonization belonged to the private business. The first successful continental colony, Jamestown, was founded in 1607 by members of the Virginia Joint Stock Company. Over time, the colonists were joined by religious fanatics, finders, and outcasts who founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony, 1620, Barbados in the Caribbean, 1627, Maryland, 1632, Connecticut, 1636, and Rhode Island, 1638. The advance of the English colonists was complicated by military conflicts with the local Indians. However, the newcomers dominated in weaponry and technology, and thus conquered and seized new territories. The British soon succeeded in capturing Belize, 1638, Jamaica, 1655, and the Mosquito Coast, 1655. Over time, England took over the Netherlands, the territories of present-day New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, 1664. England also colonized the territories of Carolina, 1662. The development of Rupert's Land from 1670 was carried out by the Hudson's Bay Company. Furs, valuable timber, and fish were shipped from the northern colonies of the east coast of America to England. The central colonies mainly supplied tobacco and sugar. The southern colonies of the Caribbean supplied tobacco, cane sugar, coffee, and chocolate. England received about 20% of the American colonies' revenues, and also actively exploited them through the Navigation Act of 1663, which prohibited the colonies from trading with other countries, bypassing English ports. In all English colonies except Rupert's Land and Newfoundland, the labor of the black slaves was used. The latter were brought there from the west coast of Africa. In the 18th century, Britain continued to be enriched by the exploitation of continental American colonies. British troops were kept at the expense of American colonists in the New World during the 7 Years' War, in which France ceded Canada to Britain in 1763. After the war, the British government decided to compensate post-war budget shortage by substantially increasing taxes for the American colonists. For example, discriminatory stamp duty was introduced, according to which the processing of trade contracts and testaments was 5 times more expensive in America than in England. In addition, there were harmful acts of navigation and high taxes on imported tea, coffee, and other vital goods. All this, coupled with the lack of political representation of Americans in the British Parliament, pushed the latter to revolt and start the Revolutionary War, which began in 1775 and ended in 1783, with the victory of the newly formed United States and Britain losing its 13 American colonies. All other American possessions remained the property of Great Britain. In the early 17th century, the British challenged Portuguese domination of India, which was rich in gold, diamonds, and spices. The English East India Company was founded in 1600. It was a joint stock company with the exclusive rights to trade with India and have its own army, territory, administration, and autonomy in the conduct of its military affairs and business. This company secured lucrative trade contracts with the Mughal Empire. The English East India Company also established a colony in Surat and founded Madras in 1640. A few years later, 1645, the company obtained the right of monopoly trade in Bengal and established several settlements and factories there. In 1663, thanks to the marriage diplomacy of King Charles II of England, the British succeeded in annexing Bombay. In 1690, the English East India Company founded the city of Calcutta. Thus, until the late 17th century, the British established a number of strongholds on the Indian coast. The disintegration of the Mughal Empire and internecine wars between Indian princes contributed to the further advance and entrenching of the British in India. In 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, the British East India Company defeated the French and their Indian allies and de facto conquered Bengal. The British conquered India by imposing subsidiary treaties under which the Indian monarchs became puppets of the British East India Company and were obliged to maintain a mercenary British army at their own expense. These private armies were made up of sepoys who were contracted from local Indians. In addition, under these treaties, the princes lost the right to have their own troops and an independent foreign policy. Also, they were obliged to provide a monopoly for the East India Company. During the Anglo-Mysore Wars, 1767 to 1799, the British were able to occupy much of the divided and multi-ethnic South India thanks to military advantage and a policy of confrontation which they applied to the local chiefs. In addition, Britain captured Sri Lanka from the Dutch in 1796. The Maratha Confederacy's attempt to resist the East India Company's invasion of central and western India turned into 3 wars. During the Second War, 1803 to 1805, and the Third War, 1817 to 1819, the British defeated the Marathas and conquered their territories. The last non-indigenous people in India were the Sikhs, against whom 2 wars were waged. In the latter, in 1849, the British East India Company defeated and took control of all of India. However, high taxes, British racism against the Indians, and the impoverishment of the locals due to the arbitrariness of the East India Company officials created a climate of hostility towards the British. The spark that ignited a powder keg of Hindu discontent and provoked a mutiny of sepoys was the introduction of new weapons, ammo that was kind of smeared with pig or cow grease. This was not acceptable to the Hindu Muslims and other Hindus who had been recruited by the East India Company. The Sepoys riot broke out in 1857 and quickly escalated into a national uprising, in which the rebels proclaimed the heir of the Mughals, Bahadur Shah II, as their leader, captured Delhi and central India, and massacred European civilians. The British, supported by some local Indian lords, succeeded in defeating the rebellion a year later at the cost of transferring extra troops across Persia and the Atlantic. Britain regained control of India and abolished the administration of the land by the East India Company due to corruption and inefficiency of the latter. Established in India, the British moved to expand their influence in southwestern Asia. Firstly, they received the island of Penang from the Malay Kedah Sultanate in 1787. Britain soon captured Java and the Malay Peninsula, 1795, from the Netherlands, and then, 1818, bought Singapore from the Sultan of Johor. In 1824, Java was returned to the Netherlands. The British left some parts of the Malay Peninsula with the local sultans as puppet rulers. On the other side of the peninsula, they established the colony of Straits Settlement. Because of the killing of his merchants in Yangon in 1824 and the invasion of India by Burmese troops, the East India Company began the First War, 1824 to 1826, with Burma. The war ended with the occupation of Yangon and the victory of the British because of their technical superiority. The Burmese king paid £1 million and ceded the province of Arakan to the East India Company, which also gained commercial privileges in the defeated state. The Second Anglo-Burmese War broke out in 1851, and a year later ended with the capture of Yangon and Peru, as well as a crushing defeat of the Burmese. The British gained